Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Codependent Dummy podcast. Today, I'm sitting with Daniel Hermosillo. Daniel is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a U.S. Army veteran who provides mental health therapy to teenage boys, men, and veterans. Daniel assists the people he works with by assisting them confronting their traumas, anxiety, depression, and relational stressors. Daniel is a cognitive behavior therapy certified therapist. He is MBSR trained and TRM trained. Daniel, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Can you enlighten us, what is MBSR trained and TRM trained for those who are unfamiliar?
Yeah, so MBSR is mindfulness-based stress reduction. It typically is a 8-week course. Each week we have like 2.5 hour sessions in which we go through different mindfulness related instructions and exercises, in which
Nice.
idea is for people to sustain those exercises or activities or meditations throughout the week so that they get the benefits of the program. And then TRM is a trauma resiliency model. So it's a different way of really approaching trauma while using somatic work. So yeah, that's what they are.
Yeah, we'll get into that more as we continue. So I'm curious, Daniel, how do you define codependency?
Yeah, so I would say it's an over-reliance to someone, and so it typically is associated to people, but I think with vets, it could be an object or even an idea, an over-reliance of that really leads to a lot of relational and functional impairments, and a lot of
Mhm.
so like functional impairments would be like not being able to function at work, not being able to sustain relationships, or not being able to self-regulate. And the emotional distress is like like all the psychological distress or emotional pain associated to that type of condition.
Mhm. An over-reliance to someone, and with veterans, potentially an over-reliance to an object or an idea.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It'd still be people, but they could be other things as well. So they could be for example, like a home, right, or an idea. So, like the home would be an object in which, a veteran has associated that to safety or some sort of symbolism, right, in which
Mhm.
they attach to it and they can't separate from it. And it's just like if they are away from a certain area or a certain place, or even if they separate from an idea of how they perceive themselves, that kind of leads to a lot of emotional distress, and a lot of times that actually impacts how they perform day to day. So,
Right.
so
Mhm.
so it's not
Okay.
codependence, but it still is codependence in its nature.
Mhm. So we will discuss veterans more, but before that, I am curious, Do you have a codependent experience or a relationship from your own life that you can share with us as you smile for people who are listening? Daniel's smiling as I'm asking that.
No, I don't have any problems. I'm, yeah, yeah. Actually, I was thinking of a few, because I have a few, unfortunately, more than I'd like to admit. Uh,
Mhm.
since this is kind of like a codependence, but we're kind of emphasizing on the veteran portion. I'd like to highlight that with an experience that it was really two. But I'll just highlight one in regards to when I was coming back from Afghanistan. I was with my ex at the time, and I found myself relying on her to really uh, not necessarily give me direction, but like feedback in a lot of things. So it's just like the military world. It's like there's always a lot of feedback and there's a lot of direction. So it's just like when there's an absence of it, it's like I found myself utilizing her as a filler or as a replacement for that. So of course that didn't help the relationship. And on top of that, because of the nature of the deployment and the experience, there was other things that were going on. So that kind of led that relationship to collapse. But
Mm.
yeah, a great example. And the more we dissect it, the more the more rich the discussion is going to be on the codependence portion of it. But yeah, that would be a great example of what codependency was like in my life at one point.
Mhm. So, a couple follow-up questions. First, what, right, you said in the military world, there's a lot of feedback and direction.
Mhm.
What's an example of that? And then, yeah, how did you seek that from your girlfriend, or what comes to mind for how you tried to seek that from her?
Yeah, so the direction is basically there's very few things in regards to like being individual, like as an individual. A lot of the individual like characteristics are like quelched in the military, right? Because
Mm.
sometimes thinking could lead to delays. Sometimes it leads to hesitations. Sometimes it's just contrary to what the direction is coming from leadership. So, and sometimes we do things that don't make sense, but because it's in order, we do it anyways. Um, so in regards to the military, it was just that there was a lack of a sense of self that would kind of help me kind of determine what I want to do anyways. So how that
Mm.
relationship, it was um, needing constant feedback as to what I was doing, and there wasn't enough self validation and a good sense of self to kind of derive those, a clear intention or initiative on my end, which would then again lead me to over rely on my ex now, but former partner at the time to kind of get that clarification from it. Uh,
Mm.
Um, was a lot of responsibility that was placed on her. But again, you know, it just it wasn't happening. So I don't know if I answered your question or if there's like an area that you want me to emphasize on.
I'm curious, is there like a quintessential moment that really captures this is Daniel in the depths of his codependence with your ex? Like, I
Yeah,
just picture you like, yeah, go ahead.
like not knowing when enough was enough, like not having a end point. It was just
Mm.
um, everything is finite, right? Even life. And in codependent relationships, there has to be something that tips someone over the edge, right? And in that relationship, at one given time, or for most of the relationship, there wasn't that threshold um, would would lead me to stand my ground or set boundaries or persist on my boundaries. So that the when I became aware of it, I think that's where that was the point where I became hyper aware of like how dysfunctional the relationship was. But not only that,
Mhm.
uh, and I'm going to use the word I'm going to use the word weak, but it really is an undefined sense of self, which led to me relying on someone else or looking for the validation of someone else.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, revisiting codependency in veterans.
Mhm.
What are, yeah, what does that look like? What does codependency look like in veterans upon their return? In their
Yeah,
families, friendships, jobs, yeah, just like the common um behaviors.
yeah. So interestingly enough, there's like an over reliance on their partners or family, right? Like, when it comes to like getting things done or even getting direction um, or even sometimes like career aspirations, there's an over reliance on getting feedback from someone else, usually a spouse, sometimes parents, sometimes it could be kids. So they, in many ways, they elevate family members to a position of authority or to a position that you or a structure that they would typically have formed in the military. But not only that, there's a sometimes there's a sense of holding on to the identity. So there's a codependence to the identity of what
Mm,
themselves as, or they can't let go of. Um, and then fundamentally, like any transition is always scary. So and that's why I say objects, because sometimes people will hold on, specifically veterans will hold on to something that will inhibit or prevent them from like adjusting to or transitioning to their new life because it's just too unpleasant. So it's like whether it's video games or whether it's substances or whether it's again an object or an identity or even people. So I guess the best way of being able to identify it would be like the where the like how severe the impairments are and what is really holding them back. So, if they have video game issues or they're always on their video games, it's like something about that object or that idea or that activity is what's, keeping them stuck. Um, and I don't know if you know this, Marissa, but a lot of times, because codependence is heavily attached to attachment, right?
mhm,
Not all veterans have attachment issues or have come from dysfunctional households. Many of them have. So they quickly attach to the military way of life because it performs or it provides structure. Um, but once that's gone, then they have nothing to attach to. So either they isolate and attach to something that is resembles a sense of safety or something that has been a secure some sort of secure attachment, whether it be figurative or literal. Um,
mhm.
uh, develop a dysfunctional relationship to it.
Right. Yeah, I'm curious, like your observations or experience. Mm, what do boundaries tend to look like in veterans struggling with codependency?
Well, that's the thing. Most of them don't have boundaries, and it's like it has to be such a severe break in the relationship that really ends up to a climax towards just like they sever that tie to whatever it may be. Like for example, there's veterans that will tolerate you know emotional, verbal, and sometimes physical abuse, and it
Mhm.
like their partner calls the police on them, that becomes a tipping point where they just, immediately, all of a sudden don't want anything to do with that partner. Um, you have other people that just won't let go of that identity, and it's just like that. There's no threshold that can separate them from that identity, or even sometimes from that partner, which then leads to detriments. That's why there's a lot of homelessness around veterans. There's a lot of veterans that are incarcerated. There's a lot of veterans, like you have a lot of high achieving veterans because there's a lot of skill sets that they learned, a lot of leadership qualities, a lot of adversities that they learned to overcome. But at the same time, on the other flip side, you have a lot of those that are underperforming or really struggling because it's just like, they've had a compound effect where it's just like everything that happened before, everything that happened in the military, and their relationship to whatever is keeping them there or keeping them in the past, is not letting them move on. Um, and again, that's why I say objects or ideas, because a lot of times that codependent nature is not necessarily associated to one person per se, but it's something that transcends a person. It's more of the significance of that object, right? And if you look at it through object relationships, a person is just an object, or that's how we perceive one another as objects. So,
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, like, yeah, I don't sense we commonly would label veterans as people pleasers. But again, like, have you observed that in veterans struggling with codependency, and what might people pleasing look like?
yeah, so it's funny because it's like it's a cognitive, it's almost like cognitive dissonance. It's just like, yeah, there's a lot of people pleasing, like and I include myself in it because, again, for those that come from dysfunctional families, like we're trying to please other people and we're trying to get that feedback that we haven't had, right? In regards to good job, or just the acknowledgement through awards, ribbons, or ceremonies, or even just qualifications, right? You beat other people in the at the time it was the APFT, which is the Army Physical Fitness Test. I don't know what they have now; they changed it, or different types of qualifications where you exceed and you get the acknowledgement. So like, even though there sometimes is a lot of externalization, right? Because like sometimes, or a lot of times, like attention can be seen as negative, but there's still that innate need for attention. So it's just like, it's really interesting. But like the best way I could describe it, sometimes it's like cognitive dissonance. It's like you want it, but you deny you want it. And that's a lot of like, that's what I've seen in a lot of veterans, because it's just um, it's seen as a not it's seen as something that could be exploited. That's really what it comes down to. Like, the attention, or the desire for attention, or belonging is seen as something that could be exploited. So a lot of times they externalize that need, but really relish it. So yeah. And please ask follow-up questions, because like I'm thinking, my mind's going everywhere. So you need to reel me in.
Well, yeah, just as we're discussing signs of what codependency looks like in veterans, right? I ask about boundaries because that's a central signal often of codependency. Yeah, people pleasing. And then self-sacrifice comes to mind. And so
Yeah.
what might that look like in veterans?
Complete void of um, their own needs. Like you see it all the time where veterans will show up and they don't even know why they're showing up to the hospital. They're like, oh, like, why do I need to go to the hospital? Like, I got to take care of my mission, right? I got to take care of the mission. Like, I can't do something that is going to hinder the mission. And that's the idea, right? It's like you're so enmeshed in what the bigger organization is, that you can't fathom taking care of your own needs. That's why there's such a huge divorce rate in the military. It's like, veterans will neglect their family entirely. Um, I'm including spouses, I'm including kids, I'm including parents, I'm including friends. they'll neglect all that just so that they could, you know, stay in the service or they could continue to fulfill their mission. Um, and sometimes and it's a healthy thing, right? Where family or people that are being neglected by the veteran try to create conflict to repair that relationship, or you know, have a healthier relationship or a less codependent relationship that the veteran has with the institution of the army or whatever idea they're attaching to. But a lot of times the veteran will cling on to the mission or the idea of the military, or the idea of of the self that needs to sacrifice, that they will reject uh, everyone else, whether it's family, kids, or even, you know, self needs, right? So that's why, like, in the VA, there's a huge need, or there's a lot of awareness that, you know, veterans don't seek help, and that's for an organization that's specifically designed to provide services for veterans. Now, if we're talking about mental health, or we're talking about, you know, anything else, it's like, yeah, there's a huge divide because that's just the norm. It's like you don't take care of yourself because that's not the priority. It's always about the team. It's always about the mission. And if one has to sacrifice for the mission, and yes, that includes one's life, then one will surrender that for the mission and for the better of of, of everyone else. And that's the key concept of service. But that's where, like, kind of codependence, or like the traits of codependence are so exacerbated in veterans, because they're not thinking of self, they're always thinking of others, and they're trying to please, right? Because imagine if you give up all that, right? You give up your family and someone is not happy with you, that's going to tear someone apart. So that the least they can take away is at least my country, or at least my command, or at least I please someone by doing all this sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Other traits, signs of codependency in veterans that come to mind.
So again, there's like a rejection of like normal behavior. So that's the cognitive dissonance portion, where it's just like they have to reject what is a healthy dependent state with others. There's uh, and I've mentioned this, over identification with identity and others, and overcommitment. So there's always um, a focus on others and never a focus on self, and that's really the biggest trait. It's just like always on everything else but self. And you know, that could look differently, and I get that's a generic term, but even like I think of students, right? Because I work with students as well, and they're focused more on the teachers, more on their academia, more on their performance than their personal needs. And one thing that has changed in regards to my bio, and my apologies for not sending this to you. Yeah, I'm a therapist, right? And I work clinically with a lot of vets, but I also work as a peer with vets too. I'm part of the Veterans Peer Access Network, which thankfully the LA County has a great partnership with different nonprofit organizations, and with veteran organizations, and the idea is to provide services to veterans through a peers outlook. So it's like, when I'm not working with vets clinically, I'm working with them like as a peer, and that is where, like, I kind of see like the more honest side of a lot of vets, because it's just like that's where I get to see vets like actually asking for help in their own way. Um, and I guess we'll talk about how to help vets. Um, but the the lack of self, the lack of value of what they are, what they have done, the lack of self identity, um, and the lack of belonging is, like, at least for me, the biggest traits or the biggest red flags to identify a veteran who may be codependent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. You have mentioned divorce, homelessness, substance abuse. I'm curious if you want to elaborate on those or add to consequences of untreated codependency in veterans.
Yeah. So again, like whether it's substances, family, homelessness, like a lot of that is objects. So it's just like an over reliance of those objects that really leads to the dysfunction. With substances, it's, at least, I feel good. And interestingly enough, um, with substances, it could be there could be a part where they are like actually listening to themselves while also over relying on the substance itself, right? Because it's just like when someone's going to get high, they know why they're going to get high. It's to get relief, but it's like the opposite side is that they're not letting go of something that's keeping them there, that's
Mhm.
creating those impairments. With family, it's a a failure to take on responsibility that needs to be taken, right? That transition. And fundamentally, they become the underachieving or underperforming person in the dynamic because they're over relying on whether it's a spouse or family member to for example, take care of the bills or take care of responsibilities or be the one that's dealing with whatever's coming up with the kids, right? They take a back seat and they hold the fort, which um, and I'm going to kind of get a little scattered, but the point I'm saying all this is because their dysfunction serves a purpose. It has historically served a purpose. And that's the problem with codependency in vets. It's just all
Right.
of it serves a purpose. So it's not by accident, just like with any other population, but more so with vets because it's like that dysfunction in many ways is the reason why they believe that they're able to sustain life, right? Because it's like veterans and service members have experienced a lot of life and death situations where their life was in immediate danger. And if they haven't, they're trained as if that's the case. So they have to adopt a lot of values and thoughts, and they have to build or identify objects as safe or not safe, or build some sort of relationship to an object, whether again it's an ideal or a place or even a person. And when there isn't that transition of from if there isn't a good transition that helps them learn to kind of grieve that and attach to other things, then they're not able to. And then the sad part is a lot with with today's issues is that sometimes they have to sustain those beliefs, that those codependent habits of staying somewhere safe or not, only hanging out with a certain demographic, whether they're just vets or people that they've known in the past, because um, veterans speak differently, they think differently. They've been exposed to different things, so it's just like by default they have the way they process information is different, and in many a times it's seen as inappropriate for the layperson, right, or the civilian. you know, Veterans and service members would refer, citizens as civilians, right, or non-citizens as civilians. So even there, even if we try to bridge that, there's still a divide between those who have served and those who haven't. And there is a clear understanding that, in many ways, even though we may, and I'm referring to veterans may communicate themselves, they're not going to be heard. So it's almost like a sense of futility, which again is really really one of the issues with codependency, right? I'm not going to say anything because it's not going to fix anything, so I might as well just please these other people, or if I'm not pleasing, at least I'm not going to get punished.
Mhm.
And that's one of those things that's really hard to engage veterans, because it's just like there's a perception of being punished, or that they are going to be punished for speaking up for their needs. And when they do speak up for their needs, it comes out differently, right? They're more direct, they're more aggression and anger, or more. Not only are they associated to testosterone, but because the military is predominantly male, And again, difficult experiences, it's a lot of competitiveness. So it's like the communication is like that, where it's just like, hey, you need to do this, but there's intensity to it. And anyone that has experienced distress or any intense need, that we're always going to speak up more intensely when there's a need, when we're deprived of something. So if someone's already naturally more aggressive and they've had training that makes them more aggressive by default because of the environment and the job they have to take, and then you have all these needs that are added on top of that, and if they have negative experiences where they had struggles, all that stuff just compounds, and then that represents that presents itself as an angry veteran. And I think and and I've heard of the stereotype, and I get it, like when people hear of a veteran coming from, or someone that served in the military and has been overseas, usually the assumption is they have PTSD. Um, and there's some truth behind it because, again, traumatic experiences. But the approach to that veteran, I think, is leading to the dysfunction because the veteran obviously is not feeling heard. They feel like they can't be heard, and when they speak up, it's like a self fulfilling prophecy, where it's just like when they do speak up, they're rejected anyways because of how they come off, or what they have to say is really relatively unpleasant. So yeah, sorry, I kind of yeah. So again, just reel me in if you need to reel me in, but
Hmm.
yeah,
Right. So I am hearing substances, homelessness, divorce, and yeah, potentially like a worsening of PTSD symptoms.
yeah,
Also from what you're saying, Daniel, I would assume it's not guaranteed, but I can just imagine that if if I were a veteran, and again, I'm not, so I'm just imagining, but if I'm trying my best to articulate my needs and it's coming off through aggression, or if I'm assuming that there's no point because no one's going to hear me, and I'm feeling worse and worse internally,
mm,
things could get really dire.
yeah,
Right. So
and
I'm also, go ahead.
yeah, yeah. No, no, keep going. I'll add to when you're done.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if, again, like the consequences of like long-term unaddressed, again, it's codependency and other factors, obviously. But yeah, if codependency can contribute to suicidal thinking, right? Potentially, like, again, like acting out aggressively to
Mhm,
assert my needs. Yeah. So just, yeah, more conflict, which resentment
mhm,
is very common in codependence, right?
yeah,
Like we're all just doing everything for everyone and
yeah,
no one's helping, right? So that type of like perception of the world, again, in a veteran, I think could really compound
mhm,
all the other symptoms and struggles that they have to navigate. Your thoughts
yeah.
on that? Yeah.
Yeah, so all that is normalized. Like the homelessness, it's like besides a few branches like the Air Force, I don't know about the Space Force, maybe the Navy, but I think for the most part, like the biggest branches which is the Army and the Marines. Um, and I guess the combat components of like the other branches, like they know what homelessness is like. Like everyone's had a cat for long periods of time. Like everyone has like have to had to live out of whatever they carry on their back. Like they've had to like go to random places where they're just sleeping on the floor or sleeping in the open air, or under the sun. And so it's just like, that's not new to them. Dysfunctional relationships with their partners, that's not new to them, right? Divorce is not new to any service member or most members, because the divorce rate is so high. When it comes to you know serving others, or neglecting self, that's a norm. So so all these things are a norm for them. So it's really hard to again, just taking it, really just tolerating other people's misbehaviors, that's a norm too. It's like, I can't tell you how many times we've had to follow dumb orders by superiors, and we just have to do it,
Mm.
right? Because that's a lawful order, whether we agree with it or not. So we do it, but at the same time, like we're complaining about it, or that we're having that built up of resentment or frustration and anger. And again, the aggression in regards to how we speak and how we express ourselves, again, that's a norm too, right? When things need to get done, it's hurry the f up. If you don't, there's going to be a punishment for it, an immediate punishment at that. So everything is immediate. Like the feedback loop is immediate. There's a there's very little delayed gratification for things that are pressing. So it's just like you do it, and then if someone gets, offended or hurt, you just like you move past that, and people learn to negate their feelings for that reason, right? So it's like a sacrifice of self in that end too. So it's just, and again, the even though there's many reasons why, a lot of times one gets married to the idea of what they are or what they're doing or what the mission is. Um, and I could give examples of that too. But that's where, like, kind of the codependency complements like the veteran lifestyle a lot, because it's just like, you know, all the dysfunctional behavior is normalized, and then all the attachment needs are still there that are not being satiated or satisfied. So then veterans just look to where to place that need on someone.
Right.
Um, and even if they find someone that is healthy and is not necessarily codependent, or codependent enabled, or that has a codependent history, a lot of times what they come to the table with is so much that then it could develop into a codependent relationship on both ends, where it's just it's not healthy for both. Um, and that's really one of the struggles, and because I'm going to call it lack of insight for or from veterans, because they've had to shut that part of themselves down, that it's just really hard to get the veteran to even acknowledge or be aware of what's happening. Not that that's the intent, but the intent behind acknowledgement or awareness is so that we could start to develop that space to start to start to change our behavior, and to really experience the change of the behavior.
Mhm.
Hopefully would be more aligned to the value set of the person. But and that's why I mentioned identity, because with veterans, like, a lot of times they haven't developed a sense of self, right? They have a bits and portions of what they are and who they are, right, from their upbringing, from their military experience, from their adult life experience, but they haven't um, um, meshed them all together. They haven't uh, had a product of all their experiences, which then, ideally would define who they are at the moment. Because we're not defined of, we're not defined of who we are or who we were in the past, who we are now, or what we're doing, or we look forward to in the future. Like, oh, that's all kind of enmeshed in one. But
Mhm.
because they don't know that, then they can act accordingly to um, to not have codependent traits, if they don't see themselves as that, or they don't identify with that, or if they are not that, because
Right.
the lack of awareness is there.
Right. So, do you sense it's accurate to say, because I really appreciate how you also said their dysfunction has served a purpose, which is a theme on this podcast, Daniel,
Mhm.
right? Like learning about our codependency, it's dysfunctional now, but
Mhm.
like trying to see and understand how it was functional
Yeah.
at a time, right? And so, yeah, so I really appreciate how I think, especially with veterans, it's such an
Mhm.
explicit example of
Yeah.
how what's dysfunctional now was hyper functional when they were serving. And
Yeah.
it's just, yeah, like you said, like that transition, or yeah, it's like, I don't know, it's not, it's like this clash of realities, because while they were serving, the world continued, but they
Mhm.
were in this world where, yeah, having codependent traits was mandatory
Yeah.
for there and their, fellow active duty member team.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was mandatory for success. But yeah, now they come back to the world that was existing the whole time.
Yeah.
But yeah, now we demand that they, have healthy boundaries
Hmm.
and have a sense of self
Hmm.
and say no to others,
Yeah.
when it's right. But yeah, it's like I can just imagine, or I cannot imagine how difficult and how much attention is needed
Hmm.
for that transition.
Right. And so there's a caveat to that. Is some
Okay.
people like their civilian life wasn't pleasant and their military life was fantastic, at least for in their eyes. So they don't want to, right? They don't want to go back. They'll hold on to the military identity, whether there was rape or there was or whatever there was, right? Whether there was trauma or a lot of anxiety, depression, a lot of just they'll hold on to that because that's the best thing they have going for them. Like, and that's the thought behind it. I could tell you, like, there's people that, were the greatest thing in the military, but, before they were in the military, they were nobodies. And after the military, they're still, at least they feel that way, right? And that's backed by, the attention they got, the responsibility they got, what they did was acknowledged and confirmed. There was a lot of satisfaction with belonging, right? It's just like you can't hire friends like the friends you could build in the army or the military.
Mhm.
And I say army because I was in the army, right? But like in any of the other branches in the military, because it's like if do you know like do you have many family members that would if you were in trouble would turn around and like lay down their life for you like that's hard to come by, but a lot of times just depending on the unit and depending on the nature, there's plenty of people that will do that, if not most, that would be willing to do that for someone. And it's just like how could you ever live that down? And then so there's a part that serves that dysfunction where it's just like you can't let go of that. You don't want to let go of that because if you let go of that, then you have to come to this reality where it's just like that's not the case. Like you're gonna be alone. You feel alone. It's like you have to worry. You have to accept the fact that now you have to grieve what you had and just accept what you have currently and work your way up. And it's just like that's a lot of effort. Like building relationships or just starting something new is difficult, but building relationships or it just like and finding people that are willing to reciprocate in that relationship is so difficult. And then to have the internal capacity and internal fortitude to have boundaries and sustain those boundaries is so difficult, especially when you have a desire and a need to belong and to have people in your life. And those boundaries were, at least for vets and service members, those were already preset in the indoctrination process, where it's like you do things and you don't do things. Like all that is set. So like there's really nothing that they had to do that wasn't already done in the military. So it's like that in the civilian life, or yeah, I'm gonna call it the civilian life, is ambiguous, right? We all define the relationships we want and what the ones we want to keep, and it's just like, and there's different levels of trust. You could trust someone with finances, but you can't trust them with your kids, and vice versa, right? So it's just like that's too ambiguous for some people, and they don't want that. They want the clear, defined relationships because that's soothing for them, that's comfortable for them, and they don't have a good imprint of what um, any other relationship is like that's healthy. And then the modeling portion of it is very difficult because who's going to take the time to model it from them if they haven't had that from their parents, and if they didn't get that in the military, or they didn't get that from a partner or their adult life, young adult life. So sometimes they stay there for that reason, and those that are trying to adjust, um, it's difficult for them too because again, sometimes they don't have a role model, so they haven't imprinted those qualities, or they don't know where the threshold is. to set boundaries, and a lot of times those boundaries come are not communicated effectively, or the type of communication is not reaching both people to where it's just like one is saying something, but it's being misunderstood as something completely different. So there's just a complete disconnect, even though that the intention is there. And I'm sure you've worked with couples, right? And a lot of times that's the case, but it's more exacerbated because now you're speaking different languages. It's like, you know, military speak and civilian speak is very different, and it's expressed differently, it's misunderstood differently. Um, so that's why the that's why veterans are such a rich population in regards to the work, but also the diversity and types of codependent habits and traits, because it's not it's not as simple as I'm going to say most people, right? Because it's just like you have added layers of issues with veterans.
Mhm.
Um, so and you know, again, some veterans choose to stay there. Like I've known of people that retired, left their entire family because their family couldn't keep up with them because they were always doing something, and then they just move on to become contractors, and they stay there. Like they never. It's like I hate to call it this way, but it's like a teenager that found something they really liked and never decided to move past that, right? And that's kind of like the fixation of it. I'm not calling them teenagers. I'm just saying that. Um, I think there's a stuck point in which um, some veterans may not want to move past because it's just either foreign to them, it's uncomfortable, or they've had some experience in it that has been very negative to the point where they don't they don't want to re-experience that or relive that, which again is more of a trauma response as well, like reliving the trauma or the experience that leads to the traumatic symptoms. Um, but which then leads to compensatory behaviors or an attachment to something else, which then kind of creates that codependent behavior or that
Mhm.
codependent dynamic. So, yeah.
I appreciate your perspective that work with veterans is rich. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. I'm fascinated right now. And so I am curious to hear what you mentioned, right? Helping, or you did like to help them a good transition, right? Grieving and attaching to other things. What are other initial steps you take in your work with veterans struggling with codependency?
So, first thing off the bat is safety. Like that's a key trait of trauma, and it really should be the key trait for any treatment, a sense of safety. And that's really going to lead to everything else. The reality is life is chaotic, crazy, and the people that are more hyper aware of it are those that have been exposed to the fragility of life, right? So a sense of safety always goes a long way, and that kind of leads into like forming a healthy relationship or a stable relationship with a clinician or even a peer, right? Because I mentioned therapist, but also do the peer work as well. So that's really what's going to really get the veteran to begin to see past what they're using to blind themselves from, right? Um, and then that's where like once they begin to feel safe, then they're going to be able to begin to identify a sense of self, right? Oh, within themselves and amongst others, right? Because it's just like um, the more one tries to look within themselves and they don't have a sense of safety, the more isolated they become because the misunderstanding is, oh, I'm not going to be understood, I'm not going to be seen, or I'm going to be rejected, even from those that are of like-minded or of like experience with it, and I'm referring to veterans, right?
Mhm.
So sense of safety, and then kind of going into uh, building relationships, self-regulating amongst themselves or within themselves or and amongst others, which is a key trait. And the interesting thing with veterans themselves is uh, through their experiences, a lot of times it's it's built into to like have them challenge themselves to do things, to do difficult things, whether it's challenging or kind of confronting a codependent relationship or leaving that relationship. Um, but the safety and the exploration and the self-regulation need to happen first. And I say that because like everyone that's served and has had to do some sort of training, whether it's combat or non-combat related, they know what a strategic retreat is. It's like, yeah, sometimes you need to pull back to reorganize, refit, resupply, and then go back at it towards the objective, right? And that's related to relationships as well. It's like sometimes you know stop, take a step back, reanalyze if this person is a good fit or whatever's happening is intended for the mission, and you could kind of you know address it then. So they have a lot of strengths, but because that safety component is not met, that safety threshold isn't met, and that identity isn't solid, everything else is just mush. And one of the failures I find with working with veterans that experience codependency or struggle in relationships is that those two things aren't met. So anything else after that is not going to work. You know, you could provide therapeutic or cognitive interventions or even like couples therapy, but if the veteran's not going to work, it's just the veteran doesn't feel safe and is not ready to detach from whatever they're holding on to and not, to stop self-sacrificing and to set up boundaries and set up, a parameter in which they're willing to operate from. That all that other stuff is I'm not going to call it advanced, but it's just it's not necessary at that point or not effective.
Mm-hmm. It's misaligned, right?
Yeah,
It's not resonant.
yeah.
It's like,
Well, right. It's like starting at step six when you hadn't even completed step one or two. In math, you would never do that, right? It's like
mhm.
if you don't know the first formula or the second formula or how to approach the third step of an equation, and you try to you know do the sixth part of the equation, how are you even going to get there? It's going to be complete gibberish, and it's going to be frustrating and aggravating. And then for someone that's already accustomed to expressing emotions in a in that kind of manner, it's just going to exacerbate it. And then if you add the codependency or the relational portion of it, that's going to further alienate them from their partner or from the relationship or the object that they're relating to.
what have you observed or experienced when the opposite happens? So when safety is there, yeah, when a veteran is able to form a healthy relationship with a peer or with a therapist.
Yeah. So a lot of beautiful things like veterans are really open-minded because they had like veterans tend to experience a lot more experience than people that haven't served, because if you think about it, by default they go to different parts of the country because they have to. They get trained, they get exposed to different cultures within the US, and they get exposed to a lot of cultures outside of the United States. But not only that, if you grow up in a community, whether it's here in LA or different parts of LA, a lot of times there's a they tend to you tend to have predominantly dominant demographics in certain areas. The military is not like that. It's like, yeah, it's predominantly white because that's the majority of the U.S. demographics, but like you have immigrants that came from Asia, Africa, from Europe, from the Americas, and even from Australia that joined the military, and that the veterans are being exposed to that. So like the openness, the personalities there, the richness of being able to communicate and understand one another is vast. It's just like, and not only that, when it comes to like political views and even religious views, because people from the left and the right and the center, and people from all backgrounds and cultures and religions join the military. Like it makes the veterans and service members pretty understanding of other people. So when
Mhm.
you have a good foundation that helps the veteran or service member be a stable person. Like, the ideas, the relationships, the attitudes, like, you know, that's fantastic. And not only that, it's just like the empathy there. You know, veterans like know what it's like to lose. Like, when someone joins the military, they lose their life, their previous life. They give up like their youth. They give up their college experiences. They give up, sometimes their girlfriends, sometimes their wives. They give up a lot. Um, and then they leave every so often, so they're always grieving something. So the potential for empathy there is phenomenal, and the lived experience. That's why, again, you have some veterans that are so high functioning because it's like the experiential component of just life that is lived is drastic compared to those that aren't veterans. Um, so when that stability is there, that foundation is there. I mean, you know, you have the grounds for making fantastic people that can contribute to our society. But when that's not there, you have the grounds to really uh, have a lot of dysfunction. And that's sometimes the hard part, right? It's good to see someone succeed, but it's how do you deal with someone that it isn't succeeding and how to get them out of it. Um, yeah, so that's what it looks like when there's a healthy relationships and better
Hmm.
a lot. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, veterans go into everything. Like there's veterans in the medical field. There's veterans in law. There's veterans in politics. There's veterans in nonprofits. There's veterans, in therapy. I'm not going to say I'm the healthiest person, but I'm doing pretty well, emotionally speaking, which then allows me to characterize my work through service, and that's what I'm trying to do now. So it's fantastic. It's just sometimes it's a lot of work, but once that foundation is realized, there's a lot of potential for good.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for coming on and enlightening us on codependency in veterans.
Hmm.
If people want to know more about you or potentially work with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. So I have a website. It's Daniel Hermosillo therapy. No, no. Daniel Hermosillo, hermosillotherapy.com. Sorry, my brain's not working apparently. Hermosillotherapy.com. You could reach out to me. My work, I have two work numbers. I have my private practice work number, then I have my VPAN work number. So for my private practice, it would be 818-744 9551. And then if you know of any veterans that need help, whether through peer or therapy, like the program VPAN is fantastic. We provide a lot of services. We do a lot of linkages for programs and assistance. So if you know of anyone that is hurting, that is a veteran, but they have received honorable and or dishonorable or other than honorable discharges, which is a topic we didn't get into, which leads to shame, and that kind of even lowers the sense of self, and kind of obliterates any sense of boundaries, which right for codependent behaviors in relationships. But Yeah, if there's a veteran that needs help, by all means, please look up VPAN. You could Google it. It's the Veteran Peer Access Network. We're all over the county, and I think even in other counties, or if not, we could still link them up. So yeah, that's how you could help with that. And Yeah, yeah, visit my website. My email, you could email me through my website and give me a call or reach out through the Veteran Peer Access Program. And yeah, love to help with that.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll put links to your website, your practice phone number, and
Mm.
VPAN in the show notes. And we'll
Okay.
have to have you on again to talk about dishonorable discharge.
Yeah,
Okay?
different. Yeah, we'll talk about the discharges.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again. And thank you, dear listener, for being here. And I will see you next week.
All right.
Hey, girl. It's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster. I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram at Therapy with Marissa. Email me, marissa@codependummy.com. Check out codependummy.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please find one.